counties. I can take care of myself.
You're welcome for not getting robbed.
Oh, hey, what's up? I'm a superhero.
This is Billy Batson.
Sorry about your window. But...
It gets real Game of Thrones around here.
Gentlemen.
Not at all.
If you could have one superpower, what would you put down?
You know, I don't think that's gonna buff out.
Your phone charge. Your phone.
No, because heroes fly.
If I quit this season, I still be the greatest.
Go! Grab it! Get out the way!
Powers.
Superpowers, dude? I don't even know how to pee in this thing.
That's I cheat.
Hello?
It's me, it's Billy!
What is happening?
You're the only person I know that knows anything about this.
Wait, for real?
Say, okay!
Shazam?
What if a teenage boy suddenly got the power to become a superhero? From crazy powers to hilarious moments, Shazam! Take superhero fun to a whole new level. Watch reviews, voila as we uncover the biggest facts, best moments, and full review of Shazam 2019. Shazam is a 2019 American superhero movie based on the DC Comics character Shazam. The movie was produced by New Line Cinema, DC Films, The Safran Company, and 7 Bucks Productions, and it was released by Warner Bros. Pictures. It is the 7th movie in the DC Extended Universe, also known as the DCEU. The movie was directed by David F. Sandberg. The screenplay was written by Henry Gayden, who worked on the story with Darren Lemke. The main cast includes Zachary Levi, Mark Strong, Asher Angel, Jack Dylan Grazer, and Jaiman Hounsou. The story follows a teenage boy named Billy Batson. Billy has spent a lot of his life moving from one foster home to another while trying to find his real mother. One day, his life completely changes when he is chosen by an ancient wizard named Shazam to become his new champion. The wizard tells Billy to say the word Shazam. When Billy says it, something crazy happens. He magically transforms from a teenage kid into a fully grown superhero. The superhero version of Billy is played by Zachary Levi. Even though Billy suddenly has the body of an adult superhero, he still has the mind and personality of a teenager. At first, he has no idea what he is doing. He and his foster brother Freddie Freeman start testing out his new powers and having a blast with them. Billy discovers that he has some seriously powerful abilities. He can fly, has incredible strength, can move extremely fast, and can shoot powerful lightning. He can also survive dangerous situations that would normally hurt a regular person. Instead of immediately becoming a perfect superhero, Billy has to learn how to control all these powers and figure out what it really means to be a hero. But things get serious when Dr. Thaddeus Sivana enters the picture. Sivana has spent years trying to prove that magic and supernatural powers are real. When he was a kid, he was taken to the wizard's magical world, but he was rejected because he wasn't considered worthy. Years later, Sivana finds a way back to the wizard's world. He gains access to the powers of the 7 deadly sins and becomes a dangerous enemy. Now he wants to use that power for himself and take down Shazam. Billy and Freddy soon realize that playing around with superhero powers is one thing, But actually being a hero is a whole different story. Billy has to grow up, face his fears, and learn to use his powers to protect other people. Meanwhile, Sivana becomes more powerful and dangerous. He unleashes the seven deadly sins and causes serious trouble. Billy has to figure out how to stop him before innocent people get hurt. The development of a live action Shazam movie actually started way back in the early 2000s at New Line Cinema. However, the project went through a lot of delays and changes before it finally became a reality. In 2009, the movie entered pre production with Peter Segal attached to direct and John August working as the writer. Dwayne Johnson was also being considered for a major role as the anti hero Black Adam. At different points, several writers were connected to the project, including William Goldman, Alex Sokolow, Joel Cohen, Bill Birch, and Jeff Johns. However, the original version of the movie never moved forward, and the project eventually fell apart. The movie was officially announced again in 2014. At that time, Dwayne Johnson was attached to play either Shazam or Black Adam, but things changed over the years. In January 2017, Johnson was officially set to lead a separate Black Adam movie instead. Meanwhile, David F. Sandberg signed on to direct Shazam in February 2017. Zachary Levi was cast as the superhero later that year in October, and Asher Angel joined the cast as Billy Batson the following month. Filming officially started in Toronto on January 29, 2018. Most of the movie was filmed at Pinewood Toronto Studios. After several months of shooting, production finally wrapped up on May 11, 2018. Shazam was released in the United States on April 5, 2019. The movie received mostly positive reviews from critics and became a solid box office success. It made around $367, 8 million worldwide. The movie was later followed by a sequel called Shazam, Fury of the Gods, which came out in the 2023. The story was also connected to the separate Black Adam movie, which was released in 2022. However, both of those movies failed to match the critical and financial success of the original Shazam movie. The first film stood out because it mixed superhero action with comedy, family moments, and the fun idea of a teenage kid suddenly getting the body and powers of a superhero. The casting process for the adult incarnation of Shazam proved one of the most extensive and deliberate searches in the production of the 2019 film. Director David F. Sandberg and the producers examined more than 100 candidates through a combination of in person auditions and self tapes before settling on Zachary Levi. Many of those who tested approached the character by deliberately diminishing their intelligence or adopting exaggerated, childish mannerisms, a tendency Sandberg repeatedly observed and rejected. He sought instead an actor who could convey genuine youthful enthusiasm, inexperience, and unfiltered excitement without condescension. Levi's self tape, submitted originally for the adult version of Freddie Freeman, immediately stood out for precisely those qualities. Sandberg recognized in Levi the energy of a big kid inhabiting an adult body and pitched him to the studio. Within days, Levi flew to Los Angeles for a formal audition and was offered the role. Levi himself had initially declined the opportunity when his agency first approached him 2 months earlier. Aware that Dwayne Johnson was already attached as Black Adam and assuming the studio would pursue a major star or a more physically imposing leading man, he passed on the chance to tape. Only after further encouragement did he record a casual self tape on his iPhone while on the East Coast. The speed with which the decision followed, self tape on a Friday, testing in Los Angeles by Monday, offer by Tuesday, underscored how clearly he matched the creative team's vision. Producer Peter Safran later emphasized that the studio placed no pressure to cast a pre existing star and instead insisted that every contender, regardless of profile, read for the part. Levi's evident gratitude and sustained enthusiasm throughout production reinforced the rightness of the choice. Parallel to the search for the adult hero, the filmmakers cast the teenage Billy Batson, Asher Angel, then best known for his work on the Disney series Andy Mack, emerged as the selection after a series of auditions that included chemistry reads. Angel had little prior familiarity with the character and immediately immersed himself in the source material once the part was his self tape recorded with his father standing in as the wizard, led to an invitation to Los Angeles and a rapid offer. Finn Wolfhard also auditioned for Billy, illustrating the competitive field of young talent under consideration. Angel's performance required him to portray a street smart foster child whose resilience and longing for family formed the emotional core of the story. Qualities that needed to remain consistent even when the character transforms into the adult. Shazam, Jack Dylan Grazer, was the first of the foster siblings locked in. Fresh from his role in the 2017 adaptation of it, Grazer brought a quick witted, fast talking energy that aligned perfectly with Freddie Freeman, Billy's superhero obsessed best friend and foster brother. Sandberg and the New Line team recognized that chemistry between Billy and Freddie would anchor the film's early sequences, so they used Grazer in subsequent chemistry tests for other young actors. His casting established a tone of playful banter and genuine affection that the remaining foster siblings would need to match. Grace Caroline Curry, credited in some materials as Grace Fulton, joined as Mary Bromfield, the eldest of the foster children. Curry had previously worked with Sandberg on Annabelle Creation, providing an existing professional rapport that eased her integration into the ensemble. Mary's character arc centers on responsibility and academic ambition. Curry conveyed a grounded maturity that balanced the more impulsive personalities around her. Ian Chen, known from Fresh Off the Boat, was cast as Eugene Choi, the tech savvy, somewhat socially awkward member of the household. Jovan Armon, who had appeared on Hawaii Five-0, took the role of Pedro Pena, whose quiet strength and physical presence later informed the design of his adult superhero counterpart. Faith Herman, already recognized for her work on This Is Us, completed the core group as Darla Dudley, the youngest and most exuberantly affectionate of the siblings. The foster parents, Rosa and Victor Vasquez, were portrayed by Marta Milans and Cooper Andrews. Milans brought warmth and quiet authority to Rosa, while Andrews, familiar to audiences from The Walking Dead, embodied Victor's steady, supportive presence. Their casting helped establish the household as genuine family rather than a temporary placement, an essential foundation for the later power sharing sequence. Supporting the central family were several key adult roles. Mark Strong entered final negotiations in late 2017 and confirmed his participation as Dr. Thaddeus Sivana by early 2018. Strong's established screen presence as a formidable antagonist, previously displayed in the Kingsman films, made him a natural fit for the film's primary villain. Jaimon Hounsou was ultimately cast as the wizard after Ron Cephas Jones had been in talks for the part. Hounsou's gravitas and commanding vocal presence lent the ancient mage the necessary mythic weight. The casting of the adult Shazam family required an entirely different strategy. Once the young actors were in place, the production sought adult performers who shared physical and personality traits with their younger counterparts. To preserve the surprise of the third act transformation, screenwriter Henry Gayden composed original audition scenes that bore no relation to the actual screenplay. These sides captured the essential character traits: Darla's rapid fire speech and innocence, Freddie's goofy energy, Mary's composure, without revealing that the roles involved superhero transformations. Actors arrived knowing only that they were reading for Shazam and left without understanding the true nature of the parts. Making Good auditioned with a scene in which her character took a driving test, speaking in the fast, enthusiastic manner associated with young Darla. Michelle Borth received 3 pages of dialogue and the unexpected instruction to dance while delivering the lines. She prepared by studying John Travolta's Saturday Night Fever routine and then extended it with her own interpretive movements. 3 months later, she learned the tape had secured her a multi picture deal as adult Mary. Adam Brody described his audition material as a cable guy esque sequence in which a ball boy suddenly joins a game and begins issuing orders. He found the scene amusing but had no idea it was intended for adult Freddy. Ross Butler and DJ Cotrona completed the adult ensemble as Eugene and Pedro, respectively. Both Brody and Cotrona had earlier been attached to George Miller's unproduced Justice League. Mortal Project, Brody as the Flash and Cotrona as Superman, adding an unintended layer of historical resonance once the secrecy surrounding their Shazam roles lifted, the production maintained strict confidentiality throughout. Custom scenes, limited script pages, and non disclosure agreements ensured that even the adult actors remained unaware of the full context until much later. Sandberg later noted that the secrecy succeeded to a degree that surprised him, especially given the prevalence of on set photography and toy leaks. The eventual reveal in the finished film relied heavily on the physical and behavioral continuity established during casting. The adult performers needed to feel like natural extensions of the children rather than generic superheroes. Additional casting filled out the wider world of the film. Ethan Pugiotto and Landon Doak portrayed the young Thaddeus and Sid Sivana in 1974 sequences, with Wayne Ward and John Glover appearing as their adult counterparts. Caroline Palmer played Billy's biological mother, while David Colesmith appeared as a still younger Billy. School and carnival sequences required a range of supporting players, including Carson McCormack and Evan Marsh as the Breyer brothers, Andy Osho as Miss E.B. Glover, Lisa Trong as Miss Kwan, and Lotta Loston, Sandberg's real-life partner, as Dr. Lynn Crosby. Voice work for the Seven Deadly Sins involved Steve Blum, Darin DePaul, and Fred Tatasciore. The cumulative effect of these decisions was an ensemble that felt cohesive across age and power levels. The young cast's natural chemistry, fostered by time spent together off camera, translated into authentic sibling dynamics on screen. The adult counterparts, selected for both resemblance and matching energy, allowed the power sharing sequence to register as a logical and emotionally satisfying extension of the family unit rather than a sudden influx of new characters. Levi's embodiment of unfiltered adolescent joy provided a consistent through line that linked Billy's vulnerability to Shazam's exuberance. Strong's measured intensity as Sivana supplied a credible counterweight, while Hounsou's wizard grounded the mythic premise. Casting directors and producers operated with unusual freedom from studio pressure to attach bankable names solely for marketing purposes. The insistence that every major role be earned through audition rather than offered created a company of performers who understood the specific demands of the material. That process extended from the lead roles through the foster siblings and into the carefully concealed adult family, resulting in a cast whose collective presence reinforced the film's central themes of found family, identity, and the unexpected sources of power. The physical transformation sequences further depended on precise casting. Costume designer Leah Butler and the visual effects teams required accurate body scans of Levi and the adult family members so that the suits and digital enhancements could be tailored to each performer. The earlier selection of actors who already shared proportional and facial similarities with the children reduced the amount of digital alteration needed and preserved a sense of continuity when the characters shifted forms. Throughout the search, Sandberg repeatedly returned to the principle that children are not simply less intelligent adults. They are individuals operating with different experience and fewer social filters. Every major casting choice tested that principle. Levi's ability to inhabit enthusiasm without artifice, Angel's grounded portrayal of a wary adolescent, Grace's rapid verbal agility, and the careful matching of adult performers to their younger counterpart all stemmed from the same foundational requirement. The resulting ensemble delivered performances that felt lived in rather than imposed, allowing the film's humor and heart to emerge organically from the characters rather than from external gags or exposition. Secondary roles continued the pattern of deliberate selection. The officers, store clerks, carnival goers, and school staff who populate the Philadelphia setting were chosen to create a textured, lived in environment against which the extraordinary events unfold. Even brief appearances, such as the drunk man, the mugger, or the school security guard, were filled by performers capable of conveying specific attitudes that grounded the fantasy in recognizable social texture. Voice casting for the sins required actors who could distinguish each deadly vice through vocal color alone, a task handled by experienced genre performers whose contributions remain largely unseen but essential to the film's climactic confrontation. The timeline of announcements reflected the careful sequencing of the process. Levi's casting became public in October 2017, followed by Angel in November, Grazer in December, and the remaining foster siblings and parents in the same period. Strong's involvement solidified in early 2018 and Honsu's later. The adult family members remained unpublicized until the film's release, a feat of production discipline that preserved one of the story's major narrative surprises. In retrospect, the casting of Shazam stands as a model of matching performer to conceptual need rather than simply filling roles with available talent. The extensive search for Levi, the early lock on Grazer to establish chemistry, the trait based secret auditions for the adult family, and the attention paid to physical and energetic continuity across age groups all contributed to an ensemble that served the film's tone and themes with unusual precision. Each decision, from the lead to the smallest supporting part, was filtered through the same criteria of authenticity, energy, and suitability for a story that ultimately concerns the discovery of belonging and power within an imperfect but genuine family. Production development and pre production, the road that eventually led to the 2019 theatrical release of Shazam, was one of the longest and most convoluted development journeys in modern superhero cinema, stretching back nearly 2 decades before the film ever reached audiences. New Line Cinema first began exploring a live action adaptation of the character in the early 2000s when the hero was still widely known by his original comic book name, Captain Marvel. Over the following years, the studio cycled through a striking number of screenwriters, each bringing a different tone and approach to the material. Among the earliest names attached to the project was legendary screenwriter William Goldman, whose credits included some of Hollywood's most celebrated scripts. He was followed by the writing team of Alex Sokolow and Joel Cohen, and later by Brian Goluboff, before the project eventually landed with John August, a screenwriter known for his witty, character driven work on films with distinctive comedic sensibilities. August's version of the script, which advanced far enough to enter pre production in 2008, framed the material as an action comedy centered on the origin story of the hero. This draft focused heavily on the relationship between the awkward teenage Billy Batson and the brawny, immature adult superhero he transforms into upon uttering the magic word, Peter Segal. A director experienced in blending broad comedy with big budget spectacle was attached to helm the project during this period, and Dwayne Johnson was in early talks to portray the film's antagonist, the anti hero Black Adam. This pairing of Segal as director and Johnson as the film's villain represented the project's first serious attempt at a green light, and for a time it appeared the film might move forward on a relatively fast track. However, the production landscape shifted dramatically during this period because of changes within the corporate structure overseeing the property. New Line Cinema, which had operated with a significant degree of independence, was absorbed into the larger Warner Brothers Entertainment umbrella, itself owned at the time by Time Warner. This consolidation occurred during the same general window in which the Shazam script was being developed, and it introduced new layers of studio oversight to a project that had previously enjoyed more creative latitude. The timing of this corporate shift proved consequential. During the summer of 2008, two very different Warner Brothers releases arrived within weeks of each other and sent sharply divergent signals about audience appetite. Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight became a cultural and commercial phenomenon, cementing a template for a darker, grittier, more grounded approach to superhero storytelling. At nearly the same moment, Speed Racer, a candy colored, family friendly adaptation from the Wachowskis, underperformed significantly at the box office. The contrast between these two outcomes appears to have influenced how the studio viewed lighter, more comedic superhero material going forward. Facing pressure from the studio to darken and retone his screenplay in the wake of these two contrasting results, John August ultimately departed the project, citing the demand for a more serious approach as his reason for leaving. With August gone, the search for a workable script continued. In August 2009, the studio brought on Bill Birch alongside Jeff Johns, a prominent and prolific writer within DC's comic book line, who would go on to hold significant creative influence over DC properties in the years that followed. Segal remained attached as director during this stage of development, but the project continued to struggle to gain real traction. By August 2010, the studio's confidence in a theatrical Shazam film had eroded to the point that executives reportedly considered abandoning the feature film approach entirely in favor of developing the property as a live action series intended for network television. This would have represented a dramatic scaling down of ambition for the character, transforming what had once been envisioned as a tentpole theatrical release into episodic small screen content. The theatrical version of the project did not die outright, but it entered what could fairly be described as development limbo for several more years. By December 2013, Siegel himself stated publicly that the film was no longer moving forward, explaining that the character's conceptual similarities to Superman had become increasingly difficult to justify to audiences and executives alike, particularly following the successful theatrical launch of Man of Steel earlier that same year. With Warner Bros. Now actively building out a shared cinematic universe centered on Superman and other DC icons, the studio appeared wary of introducing a second super powered character whose core abilities and general visual presentation overlapped so heavily with the Man of Steel. While the film sat dormant in development, significant changes were occurring on the comic book side of DC's business that would eventually reshape the character's very identity. In 2012, DC relaunched its entire line of comic books under the banner known as the New 52, using the opportunity to rebrand a number of long running characters and titles. This relaunch coincided with and was partly driven by an ongoing trademark dispute. Marvel Comics held the trademark for the name Captain Marvel in connection with its own unrelated character of the same name, a conflict rooted in a lengthy legal battle dating back decades. That original legal fight had been settled out of court in 1953 when Fawcett Comics, which had created and published the original Captain Marvel character, agreed to cease using the character and pay a substantial settlement to DC. Complicating matters further, DC had never held clear trademark rights to the name Captain Marvel itself, even after acquiring the publishing rights to the character from Fawcett in 1972. Instead, DC had been required for decades to market and promote the hero using the alternate trademark Shazam, derived from the magic word the character speaks to transform. With the new 52 relaunch providing a natural opportunity to resolve this long standing naming ambiguity once and for all, DC formally renamed the superhero Shazam within the comics themselves. Aligning the characters in universe name with the trademark the company had always been forced to use for marketing purposes. This renaming coincided with renewed momentum behind the film adaptation. In April 2014, Warner Bros. Publicly revealed an ambitious slate of upcoming feature films based on DC properties, a list that included Shazam, alongside several other titles that would, in the years that followed, see varying degrees of development success. At this stage, the studio tentatively targeted a July 2016 release date for the Shazam film, an ambitious timeline that would ultimately prove far too optimistic given how much work remained to bring the project to the screen. That same year, Dwayne Johnson publicly stated that he expected to be starring in the film, continuing his long association with the project. By September 2014, this involvement was formalized. Johnson was officially cast as the villain Black Adam, and screenwriter Darren Lemke was brought on to write a new draft of the script, replacing the earlier attempts by August, Birch, and Johns. The project continued to evolve over the following years. In January 2017, Henry Gayden was hired to rewrite Lemke's script, a hiring that would prove pivotal since Gayden's screenplay ultimately formed the foundation for the film that was eventually produced. And he received sole screenplay credit on the finished picture while sharing story credit with Lemke. The following month, February 2017, marked another crucial turning point when David F. Sandberg entered talks with the studio to direct the film. Sandberg, a Swedish filmmaker who had built his reputation directing effective, low-budget horror films, represented a somewhat unconventional choice to helm a major superhero tentpole, but his facility for blending tension, humor, and visual style made him an intriguing fit for a story that itself blends comedy, family drama, and horror adjacent villain material. Sandberg's arrival on the project coincided with a significant reshuffling of the film's core creative concept. Dwayne Johnson, who had been attached to the project in one capacity or another for well over a decade at that point, departed the Shazam film specifically in order to headline his own solo Black Adam film rather than appearing as the villain within the Shazam story itself. This decision reflected the character's growing stature and the studio's evident confidence in building out a separate franchise around the anti hero. With Johnson's Black Adam no longer serving as the film's antagonist, the production pivoted to feature Dr. Sivana, another significant villain from the character's comic book history, as the primary antagonist for the theatrical film. Around the same period, Sandberg was reportedly also approached about directing Venom for Sony Pictures, another major comic book adaptation entering production around the same time. Sandberg ultimately chose to direct Shazam. Instead, citing as a key factor that the Shazam crew included several collaborators he had already worked with previously at New Line Cinema, suggesting that personal working relationships and creative comfort played a meaningful role in his decision making process. By July 2017, the studio had moved the project into active development in earnest, with Sandberg's role as director now confirmed and a production start targeted for early 2018. Dwayne Johnson, reflecting on the changes to the project since his initial involvement, noted that an entirely different creative team was now steering the film compared to when he had first signed on years earlier, a testament to just how many personnel changes the project had weathered across its long gestation. Around this same period, Zachary Levi, who would go on to be cast in the title role, gave an interview in which he offered a useful shorthand for the tone the filmmakers were pursuing, comparing the intended feel of the movie to the classic body swap comedy big but reimagined with superpowers layered on top of the coming of age wish fulfillment premise. This comparison would go on to be repeated frequently by journalists and critics covering the film, both before and after its release, as a useful shorthand for its blend of childlike wonder and superhero spectacle. Warner Bros. Also clarified around this time that the film story would draw specifically from a modernized 2012 to 2013 comic book origin story that had run as a backup feature within the pages of the Justice League comic, written by Jeff Johns with art by Gary Frank. This particular version of the Shazam mythology streamlined and modernized many elements of the character's decades old comic book history, providing a cleaner entry point for mainstream audiences unfamiliar with the more baroque, decades accumulated lore of the original Captain Marvel comics. In August 2017, Sandberg indicated in an interview that Shazam would be the very next film to begin production within the broader DC cinematic universe, underscoring how quickly the project had gone from stalled development to genuine production momentum under his direction. By the end of that same month, the film had formally entered pre production. The technical and design teams began to take shape shortly afterward. In October 2017, cinematographer Maxime Alexander and production designer Jennifer Spence joined the production. Both had previously collaborated with Sandberg on Annabelle Creation, his prior directorial effort, suggesting that Sandberg was building out his creative team in part by bringing along trusted collaborators from his horror filmmaking background. The following month, November 2017, stunt coordinator Kyle Gardner, who had previously worked on the action sequences for Aquaman, was hired to design and oversee the film's physical stunt work, an important hire given how much of the film's second half hinges on large-scale action set pieces. The film's release date was formally announced on January 12, 2018, initially set for April 19, 2019, though this date was later moved up slightly to April 5, 2019, the date on which the film ultimately opened in the United States. Viewed as a whole, the winding development history of Shazam offers a useful case study in how long gestating studio properties can take shape across changing corporate ownership structures, shifting creative regimes, and evolving industry trends. What began in the early 2000s as a comparatively straightforward origin story adaptation, envisioned by John August as a lighter action comedy in the vein of a coming of age wish fulfillment story, was buffeted over the following decade and a half by a series of external pressures largely unrelated to the underlying merits of the material itself. The shifting fortunes of the superhero genre, more broadly, the consolidation of New Line Cinema into the larger Warner Bros. Corporate structure, competing trademark concerns tied up in decades old legal history, and the launch of an entirely new shared cinematic universe anchored by Superman all played a role in delaying, reshaping, and ultimately revitalizing the project. That the film eventually reached the screen largely intact in tone with August's original comedic conception rather than the darker, more serious version the studio had pushed for in the wake of the Dark Knight's success speaks to how much creative ground had shifted within the industry and within Warner Brothers' own approach to its DC property specifically. By the time Sandberg and Gayden took over the project in 2017, casting for the film's ensemble began around the same time as the broader pre production ramp up in August 2017. One of the more distinctive creative decisions Sandberg made regarding the casting process concerned how to handle the character's dual nature as both a 14-year-old boy and the adult superhero he transforms into. Rather than relying on digital de aging technology or other visual effects techniques to allow a single actor to portray both versions of the character, Sandberg opted for a more traditional approach, casting two separate actors, one to play young Billy Batson and one to portray his adult superhero alter ego. This decision had significant implications for how the film could approach both its comedic tone and its visual authenticity, since a genuinely adult actor performing the physical comedy of an overwhelmed teenager suddenly possessing superhuman strength would read differently on screen than a digitally altered younger performer. The search for the actor to play the adult version of the character brought in a notable roster of contenders: John Cena, Zane Holmes, Jake McDormand, Derek Teller, and Billy Magnuson all either met with Sandberg or formally auditioned for the role of the adult Billy Batson. In an amusing wrinkle that would only become public knowledge after the film's release, Zachary Levi, who would ultimately land the title role, had actually first auditioned for a different part in the film entirely, reading for the role of the adult version of Freddie Freeman, Billy's foster brother, rather than for Shazam himself. By October 2017, Levi had been cast in the starring role. According to accounts that emerged after the casting was finalized, Sandberg selected Levy from a pool of roughly 100 actors who had auditioned for the part, and the audition tape that ultimately won him the role had reportedly been recorded on an iPhone rather than through more elaborate, professionally staged casting session equipment. A small but telling detail about how directly a personality and chemistry, rather than production polish, guided the final casting decision. The following month brought several additional casting announcements. Grace Fulton joined the cast in November 2017 as Mary Bromfield, one of Billy's foster siblings. Fulton had, like cinematographer Maxime Alexander and production designer Jennifer Spence, previously worked with Sandberg on Annabelle Creation, further reinforcing the pattern of the director drawing on trusted past collaborators as he assembled his team for a much larger scale production than his previous horror features. Later that same month, Mark Strong entered final negotiations to portray the film's central antagonist, Dr. Thaddeus Sivana. Strong would go on to confirm his involvement publicly by January 2018. His casting carried a notable point of trivia for longtime followers of DC film adaptations. Strong had previously played the villain Sinestro in the 2011 film Green Lantern, meaning Shazam, marked his second outing as an antagonist in a film based on DC Comics characters, separated by nearly a decade. Also in November 2017, Asher Angel was cast as the teenage version of Billy Batson, the character whose perspective anchors much of the film's emotional and comedic through line before his transformations into the adult hero. Angel, known at the time primarily for his work on the Disney Channel series Andy Mack, beat out other contenders for the role, including Finn Wolfhard, who had also auditioned for the part around this period. The following month, December 2017, brought the casting of Jack Dylan Grazer as Freddie Freeman, Billy's foster brother and closest ally within the household, a role that would prove central to much of the film's comedic chemistry and heart. Later that same month, several more key roles were filled. Jovan Arman, Ian Chen, Faith Herman, and Cooper Andrews were cast respectively as Pedro Pena, Eugene Choi, and Darla Dudley, three of Billy's other foster siblings, with Andrews additionally taking on the role of Victor Vasquez, one of the two foster parents overseeing the household where Billy is eventually placed. The casting process continued into the new year. By January 2018, Ron Cephas Jones had entered talks to portray the ancient wizard Shazam, the mystical figure who grants Billy his powers at the story's outset. Later that same month, Spanish actress Marta Milans joined the cast as Rosa Vasquez, the other of the two foster parents. By the end of January 2018, Lotta Loston, the real life wife of director David F. Sandberg, revealed publicly that she had been cast in a role in the film as well, continuing a pattern of Sandberg, incorporating people from his personal and professional circle into the production. On April 23, 2018, well after principal photography had already begun, Ross Butler joined the cast. By July 2018, the film's casting saw one final significant shift when Jimon Hounsou replaced Ron Cephas Jones in the role of the wizard Shazam, a change attributed to scheduling conflicts that prevented Jones from continuing with the production. Around this same period, there were also discussions about Henry Cavill reprising his role as Superman from earlier DC Extended Universe films for a cameo appearance. Though ultimately Cavill was unable to participate in filming due to scheduling difficulties, a limitation that would shape how the production ultimately handled the Superman cameo that does appear in the finished film. Filming principal photography for Shazam began on January 29, 2018, in Toronto and the nearby city of Hamilton, both located in the Canadian province of Ontario. During this early phase of production, the film operated under the working title Franklin, a common industry practice used to help maintain a degree of secrecy around high profile productions and to discourage unauthorized leaks of set photography or plot details before the studio was ready to control the narrative around the project. The choice of Toronto as a primary filming hub reflected a well established pattern within the film industry, where Canadian cities frequently serve as substitutes for major American urban centers, offering production incentives, tax credits, and infrastructure that make large scale studio productions financially attractive to shoot there, even when the finished film is set in an American city. Indeed, although much of the physical production took place in and around Toronto, the story itself is set primarily in Philadelphia, and the film is firmly positioned within the continuity of the broader DC extended universe established by earlier entries in the franchise. The bulk of principal photography took place at Pinewood Toronto Studios, a major studio facility that has hosted numerous large scale film and television productions. Beyond the sound stages, the production also made extensive use of public locations around Toronto to stand in for various Philadelphia settings, including sequences filmed at the University of Toronto and at the Woodbine Shopping Center, as well as at the Hearn Generating Station, a decommissioned power plant that has become a popular filming location for productions requiring large atmospheric industrial interiors. In early March 2018, the production also filmed scenes at Fort York National Historic Site, a historic military fortification located in downtown Toronto. The shoot proceeded through the winter and into the spring of 2018. By early May 2018, several of the film's younger cast members, including Asher Angel, had completed their portions of principal photography, reflecting the scheduling considerations that often come into play when working with minors on set, including limitations on working hours and the need to balance filming schedules with the young performers' educational requirements. Principal photography as a whole officially wrapped on May 11, 2018, a milestone that director David F. Sandberg marked publicly, noting that the production was moving into what would be several months of post production work. However, The film's shooting schedule was not entirely finished at that point. Like many large studio productions, Shazam underwent a subsequent period of reshoots and additional photography, which took place back in Toronto between November and December 2018, several months after the original wrap of principal photography. Reshoots of this kind are a standard part of the modern studio filmmaking process, frequently used to refine action sequences, address pacing or story issues identified during the editing process, capture additional coverage for scenes, or simply pick up shots that could not be completed during the original shooting schedule. In December 2018, additional location work took the production to Philadelphia itself for the first time, where the crew captured scenes set at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, a location made famous in popular culture by its use in earlier films, along with additional footage of the city's skyline and various aerial shots used to help ground the film's fictional setting of Fawcett City in a recognizable, geographically specific American urban landscape. Financially, Shazam was produced on a comparatively modest budget for a major studio superhero film, reported at somewhere between 90 and 100 million dollars, with the final figure climbing to approximately 102 million dollars once post-production costs were factored in. This budget level made Shazam notably the least expensive entry in the DC extended universe up to that point in the franchise's history, a fact that would later be highlighted by journalists and industry analysts discussing the film's financial performance and its comparatively favorable risk profile relative to some of the franchise's costlier prior installments. The relatively contained budget shaped many of the practical decisions made throughout the shoot. Choosing to base the bulk of production at a single well equipped facility like Pinewood Toronto Studios, rather than moving the production repeatedly between multiple cities or countries, allowed the filmmakers to maximize the value of their soundstage builds and minimize the additional costs associated with relocating cast, crew, and equipment. Similarly, leaning on Toronto's existing pool of experienced local crew, along with the province of Ontario's film production incentives, gave the production meaningful cost advantages compared to shooting extensively on location in the film's nominal setting of Philadelphia. This approach mirrored a broader trend across the film industry during this period, in which numerous major studio productions, including a number of other DC and Marvel releases, made extensive use of Toronto, Atlanta, and other production friendly cities as substitutes for their nominal American settings, reserving location photography in the actual setting city for a comparatively small number of establishing or exterior shots. Much as Shazam, brief December 2018 unit in Philadelphia was used primarily to capture skyline footage, aerial photography, and specific landmark sequences at the Philadelphia Museum of Art rather than serving as a base for the bulk of principal photography. The winter shooting schedule also presented its own logistical considerations for the production, given that the story itself is explicitly set during the winter months and much of the narrative's tone and lighting design was built around that seasonal backdrop. Filming through the cold Ontario winter allowed the production to capture a considerable amount of natural weather and atmosphere that aligned with the story's wintry setting, though it also required careful planning around the needs of the film's younger cast members, several of whom were still school aged throughout the shoot and required tutoring, limited working hours, and other accommodations typical of productions employing child actors. Post production editing duties on the film fell to Michelle Aller, who had previously collaborated with director David F. Sandberg on two prior occasions, making Shazam their third collaboration together. This continuity of the director-editor relationship across multiple projects is a common pattern in the industry, allowing a director and editor to develop shorthand and mutual understanding of pacing and tone preferences that can streamline the sometimes lengthy and iterative post-production editing process, particularly valuable on a film that blends comedic timing, horror-inflected suspense sequences, and large-scale action spectacle within a single narrative. Given the scale of visual effects required for a modern superhero film, encompassing everything from the character transformation sequences to the elaborate creature designs for the seven deadly sins and large scale destruction sequences during the film's climax. The visual effects work required significant coordination across multiple specialized studios. Mike Wassell, whose prior credits included work on Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, as well as entries in the Fast and Furious franchise, and Kelvin McIlvaine, who had previously worked on Aquaman, served as the overall visual effects supervisors, coordinating this work across the production. The physical visual effects labor itself was distributed across a number of specialized studios. Technicolor's VFX division, known by the studio name Mr. X, contributed to the effects work. That particular effects house had previously built its reputation on films including The Shape of Water and Tron Legacy, moving picture company, commonly known within the industry by its abbreviation MPC, also provided significant visual effects work for the production. Beyond these two primary vendors, several additional effects houses contributed to specific sequences and elements throughout the film, including Rodeo FX, DNAG, Digital Domain, and Rise FX. This kind of distributed approach to visual effects work, spreading different sequences or types of effects across multiple specialized studios, has become increasingly standard practice for major studio releases, allowing productions to leverage the particular strengths and available capacity of different effects houses simultaneously rather than relying on a single vendor for the entirety of a film's effects workload. One of the more technically and narratively significant effects challenges facing the production involved bringing the film's primary antagonists, the seven deadly sins, to life on screen. Rather than rendering these demonic creatures as pure digital creations from the ground up, the production instead had these characters performed on set during principal photography by stunt performers wearing motion capture suits, with the performances subsequently translated into fully rendered computer generated imagery during post production. This approach, common in modern effects heavy filmmaking, allows the final digital creatures to retain a grounded sense of physicality and weight derived from an actual human performance, while still permitting the visual design of the characters to depart entirely from realistic human anatomy. The voices for the collective of seven deadly sins characters were provided by voice actors Steve Blum, Darren DePaul, and Fred Tatasciore, with the trio collectively voicing all seven of the demonic figures across the film. Notably, Tatasciore had prior experience specifically voicing this same group of villains, having previously voiced the seven sins in the direct-to-video animated feature Lego DC Superhero Girls, Super Villain High, giving him a degree of familiarity with the characters that predated his work on the live-action feature. The finished film also incorporates a number of smaller cameo appearances and creative touches woven in during production and post-production. Director David F. Sandberg himself appears on screen in cameo form, portraying each of the three so-called crocodile men creatures that appear within the film, work for which he received assistance from creature performers Steve Newburn and Ned Morrell. Sandberg additionally lent his own voice to the alien lifeform known as Mr. Mind, who appears during a mid-credit sequence, setting up story threads for a potential future installment. Sandberg's wife, actress Lotta Loston, portrays Dr. Lynn Crosby, a researcher who works alongside the villainous Dr. Sivana and who is ultimately killed by him during the course of the film. In a smaller, uncredited touch, sound designer Bill R. Dean provided the voice for a Batman toy that appears briefly within the film, while Ryan Hadley, who served as Zachary Levi's stunt double throughout the production, appears uncredited as a body double portraying Superman during the film's climactic cafeteria scene cameo. Because Henry Cavill was unable to participate in filming this Superman appearance due to scheduling conflicts, the production handled his absence creatively by filming Hadley from the neck down only, keeping the character's face obscured or off screen entirely so as to preserve the surprise and avoid the need for Cavill's direct on camera participation. Elsewhere, executive producer Dwayne Johnson's likeness was used to create a mystically generated holographic projection of the character Death Adam, conjured by the wizard Shazam during a sequence in which he explains to Billy the history of the Rock of Eternity, the broader mythological structure of the seven realms of magic, and the story of his previous champion. This brief appearance functioned as an early tease of Johnson's eventual on screen portrayal of the character in his own subsequent solo film. Additionally, in a small Easter egg touch connecting the film to Sandberg's earlier body of work, actress Andy Osho reprises her role as social worker Emma Glover, a character she had previously portrayed in Sandberg's feature directorial debut. The horror film Lights Out, a nod that suggested a shared, if lightly acknowledged, connection between the two otherwise unrelated productions. Taken as a whole, the post production process on Shazam reflects the layered, highly collaborative nature of modern effects driven blockbuster filmmaking, in which editing, visual effects, sound design, and musical scoring must all be developed largely in parallel and then woven together into a cohesive final product over the course of many months. The decision to distribute visual effects work across half a dozen distinct vendor studios, each contributing different sequences or elements according to their particular specialties, required careful coordination from the supervising visual effects team to ensure a consistent visual language across the finished film, particularly given how much of the film's second half depends on maintaining a believable sense of physical weight and presence for both its transformed superhero characters and its demonic antagonists. The extended reshoot period in the final months of 2018, running concurrently with much of this post production effects work, further added complexity to the schedule, requiring the effects and editorial teams to incorporate newly captured footage into a pipeline that was, in some cases, already well underway. Music, the film's score, was composed by Benjamin Wallfish, whose hiring was formally announced on July 21, 2018. This assignment marked Wallfish's third collaboration with director David F. Sandberg, following his earlier work scoring Sandberg's horror films Lights Out and Annabelle creation. This continuity between director and composer mirrored the similar pattern seen with editor Michel Aller, further underscoring how much of Shazam's core creative team was built around collaborators Sandberg had worked with previously, even as the scale and genre of the production shifted dramatically from low budget horror to a major studio superhero tentpole. Wallfish's involvement with the broader DC Extended Universe actually predated his work on Shazam itself. He had previously contributed additional music to Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, the second film released within the franchise, giving him some prior familiarity with the musical world and thematic language of the shared cinematic universe he would now be composing a standalone score for. In discussing his approach to the score, Wallfish pointed to the work of composer John Williams, along with the broader musical style associated with 1980s Amblin Entertainment Productions as key inspirations guiding the tone he wanted to achieve. This reference point makes sense, given the film's deliberate positioning as a throwback to an earlier, more innocent and adventure driven style of family oriented blockbuster filmmaking, evoking the sense of a classic origin story for what the film's creative team explicitly conceived of as an old school superhero rooted in the golden age of comic books rather than the grittier, more contemporary tone associated with many other modern superhero adaptations. Wallfish described his creative process for the score in vivid terms, framing his approach around imagining what kind of music might result if a 14-year-old were given free rein in front of a 100-piece orchestra with no constraints placed on him whatsoever. He wanted the resulting score to carry the feeling that it might have been written by an exuberant kid experiencing the thrill of working with a full orchestra for the very first time, channeling that sense of unrestrained joy and discovery directly into the musical themes and orchestration choices that ultimately appear throughout the finished film. This conceptual framing aligns closely with the film's broader thematic interest in wish fulfillment and the experience of a child suddenly granted access to extraordinary, almost limitless power, mirroring at the level of the score's compositional philosophy the same central conceit that drives the film's plot and character arc. Wallfish's decision to draw on the orchestral traditions associated with John Williams and 1980s Amblin family adventure filmmaking rather than the more brooding, minimalist, or electronically inflected scoring approaches that had characterized some earlier DC Extended Universe films, represented a deliberate tonal departure for the franchise, where prior entries in the series had frequently leaned on darker, more atmospheric musical textures in keeping with their generally more serious visual and narrative approach. Wallfish's Shazam score instead embraced full, sweeping orchestral themes, bright brass fanfares, and a sense of melodic playfulness intended to underscore the film's comedic set pieces as readily as its more sincere emotional beats. This musical choice functioned as one more expression of the broader creative repositioning that Sandberg, Gaiden, and the rest of the production's key collaborators pursued throughout development, production, and post production alike, an effort to differentiate Shazam from its more somber cinematic predecessors within the DC Extended Universe by fully committing to the character's inherent sense of childlike wonder, rather than filtering that wonder through a darker or more self serious visual and tonal lens. Rolly's theatrical the marketing rollout for Shazam began well before the film's eventual theatrical release, with the studio gradually building anticipation through a series of convention appearances, trailers, and promotional events across roughly a full year leading up to the film's premiere. In April 2018, a first look at the film was presented at CinemaCon, an industry convention held in Las Vegas, Nevada, where exhibitors and press gathered to preview upcoming studio releases. Director David F. Sandberg personally introduced behind the scenes footage to the assembled audience at this event, offering an early glimpse of the production's tone and visual approach before the film had completed shooting. In an interview conducted with the podcast Film Riot in June 2018, Sandberg offered further insight into the visual and tonal ambitions guiding the production, describing his desire for the film to feel like a classic superhero movie, and noting that because the story is set during winter, the film's visual palette would lean heavily on dark exterior settings, offset by an abundance of colorful lighting, a combination intended to preserve a sense of warmth, energy, and comic book vibrancy, even within a wintry, nighttime heavy visual framework. The film's first teaser trailer debuted on July 21, 2018 at San Diego Comic Con, one of the largest and most closely watched pop culture conventions in the world during the Warner Brothers panel held in the convention's cavernous Hall H venue. Sandberg was joined at this event by cast members Zachary Levi, Asher Angel, and Jack Dylan Grazer, giving the assembled fans and press an early opportunity to see the film's key creative and performing talent in person before the trailer's wider online release. Once the trailer became available online following the Comic Con debut, it received a notably favorable response from both journalists and general audiences, who responded positively to its humorous, zany tone, a reaction that many industry observers noted stood out from more somber marketing approaches used for some other DC film releases up to that point. Promotional momentum continued later in the year at additional international events. New footage from the film debuted at Brazil Comic Con, commonly known by its abbreviation CCXP, held in Sao Paulo on December 9, 2018. Again, as part of a Warner Brothers studio panel, with the footage shown to the CCXP audience described by attendees as particularly action packed in tone, offering a preview of some of the film's larger set piece sequences. A new trailer followed on March 4, 2019, closer to the film's theatrical release date, and a 3-minute sneak peek of Shazam. Footage was additionally bundled with the digital home media release of Aquaman, another DC Extended Universe film that had performed strongly at the box office the previous winter, giving the marketing campaign a built in audience of viewers already engaged with the franchise. In a somewhat unconventional promotional tie in, Shazam served as the primary sponsor for driver Arik Almirola and his number 10 Ford Mustang, competing in the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series at the STP 500 race held on March 24, 2019, just ahead of the film's theatrical debut, reflecting the broad cross industry approach studios often take to marketing major tentpole releases. Altogether, the studio's total promotional spending on the film's marketing campaign reached approximately $105 million, a substantial sum that notably exceeded the film's actual production budget. As the release date approached, Warner Brothers Pictures announced on March 13, 2019, a partnership with the ticketing service Fandango to offer exclusive preview screenings on March 23, a full 2 weeks ahead of the film's official wide release. These preview screenings were made available across roughly 1,400 select movie screens, spanning some 40 different exhibition circuits, giving eager audiences an early opportunity to see the film ahead of its formal opening. The film subsequently held its official premiere at the historic TCL Chinese Theatre in Hollywood on March 28, 2019, an event that typically draws significant media attention and serves as a high profile capstone to a film's marketing rollout. Shazam then went on to its formal theatrical release across the United States. Distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures on April 5, 2019, the release date that had been set following the earlier adjustment from the initially announced April 19 date. The overall shape of the marketing campaign reflected a clear strategic choice on the part of Warner Bros. To lean heavily into the film's comedic, family friendly tone from the very first trailer onward, rather than positioning it as a more conventional, action first superhero blockbuster. This approach carried a degree of risk since it meant differentiating Shazam quite sharply from the marketing tone used for some of the studio's earlier DC Extended Universe releases, several of which had emphasized darker visuals and more serious themes in their own promotional campaigns. The strongly positive audience and press reaction to the first teaser trailer at San Diego Comic Con appears to have validated this strategic bet fairly early in the marketing cycle, giving the studio confidence to continue building the campaign around the film's humor and heart rather than pivoting toward a more conventional action blockbuster sales pitch as the release date approached. The eventual box office and critical results discussed in the following section would suggest that this marketing approach succeeded in setting accurate audience expectations, contributing to the strongly positive cinema score and post-track audience reception. The film ultimately received upon release home media following its theatrical run. Shazam made its way to consumers through home media in stages typical of major studio releases during this period. The film was made available for digital download purchase on July 2, 2019, giving audiences an earlier at home viewing option ahead of the physical media release. 2 weeks later, on July 16, 2019, the film was released across the range of physical home video formats, including Ultra HD Blu ray, Standard Blu ray, and DVD. These physical releases were packaged with a selection of bonus content, typical of studio home media releases of the era, including behind the scenes featurettes, offering insight into the production process, a selection of deleted scenes that had been trimmed from the theatrical cut, and gag reels showcasing lighter, blooper style footage captured during filming. In terms of commercial performance on home video, available sales tracking indicated that as of an update dated August 20, 2020, Shazam had generated approximately $3 million in DVD sales alongside approximately $21 million in Blu-ray sales for a combined estimated total of roughly $29.4 million in domestic home video sales revenue. While this figure represents only a portion of the film's overall commercial performance and does not capture digital rental, streaming licensing, or international home video sales, it nonetheless offers a useful additional data point illustrating the ongoing revenue generated by the film well after its theatrical run had concluded, reflecting the continued audience appetite for revisiting the film in a home viewing context. Following its initial cinema release, the staggered rollout of digital, then physical, home media releases followed a pattern that had become standard across the film industry by 2019, with studios generally offering digital purchase options slightly ahead of physical disc releases in order to capture early adopting consumers while continuing to build anticipation for the fuller physical media release that would follow roughly 2 weeks later. The inclusion of behind the scenes, featurettes, deleted scenes, and gag reels on the physical releases reflected an ongoing industry effort to provide added value to consumers purchasing physical media at a time when streaming and digital rental options were increasingly available as lower cost alternatives, giving physical media purchasers exclusive bonus content not available through other distribution channels as an incentive to continue purchasing discs. Reception box office Shazam ultimately proved to be a solid commercial success for Warner Bros., grossing a combined worldwide total of $367.8 million dollars across its theatrical run, with 140. $5 million dollars of that total coming from the United States and Canada, and the remaining $227.3 million dollars generated across other international territories. Industry estimates prior to release had suggested the film would need to gross somewhere in the range of 235 to 250 million dollars worldwide simply to break even once the full range of production and marketing costs were taken into account. Against that benchmark, the film's eventual total comfortably cleared the break even threshold and trade publication deadline. Hollywood subsequently calculated that the film generated a net profit of approximately $74 million dollars once. All associated expenses and revenues had been fully factored into the analysis, a genuinely healthy return that reinforced the film's reputation as a commercial success story within the DC Extended Universe's mixed overall box office track record. In its domestic release, Shazam opened in the United States and Canada alongside two other films, The Best of Enemies and Pet Cemetery, entering a competitive early April marketplace. Prior to release, the film had been projected to open somewhere in the range of 40 to 50 million dollars from an initial theatrical footprint of 4,260 theaters across the country. The film's box office performance actually began accumulating revenue before its official wide opening, thanks to the Fandango sponsored advance preview screenings held 2 weeks ahead of release, which generated $3 million, dollars, a total that notably exceeded the $2.9 million dollars generated by the comparable advance screenings for fellow DC Extended Universe release, Aquaman, the previous December, an encouraging early sign of audience enthusiasm. The film then added $5.9 million dollars from Thursday night preview screenings held on April 4, bringing its combined preview total to $2 million dollars heading into its official opening weekend. Once the wider release began, Shazam grossed a total of $20.4 million dollars on its first day, a figure that included the Thursday night preview revenue but excluded the earlier March advance screenings. The film went on to post an opening weekend total of $53.5 million, dollars, a result strong enough to secure the top position at the domestic box office for the week. This opening comfortably exceeded the pre release tracking projections, suggesting stronger than anticipated audience turnout and positive word of mouth building on the already favorable critical and trailer reception the film had received in the lead up to release. The film's box office momentum continued into its second weekend, during which it earned an additional $24.5 million, dollars, allowing it to retain its position atop the domestic box office chart for a second consecutive week. This staying power reflected relatively strong word of mouth engagement, a pattern often associated with family friendly films that draw repeat viewings and multi generational audience groups. However, the film's run at the top of the chart came to an end in its third weekend, when it was overtaken by newcomer The Curse of La Llorona, a horror release that opened strongly during that same period. By its fourth weekend in release, Shazam had settled into fifth place at the domestic box office, earning $5.6 million dollars during that frame and finding itself now competing against an increasingly crowded field of major releases, including two other high profile superhero films that had entered the marketplace by that point: Avengers Endgame, which would go on to become one of the highest grossing films of all time, and Captain Marvel, itself a major Disney Marvel release that had opened a few weeks prior to Shazam. Internationally, the film followed a staggered rollout typical of major studio releases, opening in 53 markets on Wednesday, April 3, and Thursday, April 4, ahead of the North American release. Pre release projections had estimated an international opening in the range of $100 to $120 million, dollars, which combined with domestic projections to suggest a global opening weekend somewhere between 145 and $170 million. In its first 2 days of international release, the film generated $15.7 million, finishing in first place in 48 of the 53 markets in which it had opened during that initial window. The rollout then expanded further, with the film opening in an additional 26 countries, including the significant market of China, where it earned $16.4 million on its opening day alone. Taken together, the film's full international debut totaled $102 million, contributing to a combined global total of 158. $6 million for the film's opening period. Across the full scope of its international rollout, Shazam finished in first place in 60 of the 79 markets in which it had opened by that point. Among individual territories, the film's strongest performing markets included China, where it earned $43.4 million, the United Kingdom at $15.3 million, Mexico at $10.6 million, Australia at $10.3 million, Brazil at $7 million, and Russia at $8.4 million, a geographically diverse spread of strong performing markets that helped underpin the film's overall solid worldwide commercial result. Considered in the context of the broader DC Extended Universe's box office history, up to that point, Shazam, as financial performance occupied a distinctive middle position. It did not approach the towering worldwide grosses posted by some of the franchise's largest prior releases, but its comparatively modest production budget meant that its ultimate financial return, when measured as a ratio of profit to production cost, compared quite favorably to several of the studio's costlier DC releases. This dynamic, a strong return on a relatively contained investment, achieved through a combination of positive critical buzz, favorable word of mouth, and a marketing campaign that successfully differentiated the film from its franchise predecessors, was frequently cited by industry commentators in the months following the film's release as a notable success story for Warner Bros. Broader DC film strategy, and likely contributed to the relatively swift decision to move forward with both a direct sequel and a related spin off feature focused on the villainous Black Adam. Critical response: Shazam was met with a notably positive critical reception upon its release, standing out as one of the more warmly received entries within the broader DC Extended Universe up to that point in the franchise's history. On the review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 90% based on 421 collected reviews, with an average rating of 7.3 out of 10 among those reviews. The site's official critical consensus characterizes the film as an effortlessly entertaining combination of humor and heart, describing it as a superhero film that never loses sight of the genre's core power: joyous wish fulfillment. On Metacritic, a separate aggregator that assigns a weighted average score based on a curated pool of critic reviews, the film holds a score of 71 out of 100 based on 53 critics, a result that the site's own classification system characterizes as indicating generally favorable reviews overall. Beyond professional critic scores, audience response tracked similarly positively. Audiences surveyed by Cinema Score, a service that polls opening night moviegoers immediately after screenings, awarded the film an average grade of A on the service's letter grade scale that runs from A plus down to F. Separately, audiences polled by PostTrack, another audience tracking service, gave the film a 79% positive score overall, with 59% of respondents indicating that they would definitely recommend the film to others. Individual reviews from major outlets reflected a broadly appreciative, if not universally uncritical, response to the film. Nick Allen, writing for RogerEbert.com, offered a review with some reservations, suggesting that although the film proved to be both goofier and, at points, somewhat darker than its marketing had suggested, viewers might still come away wishing that the title superhero himself carried a bit more spark or charisma within the finished film. The Hollywood Reporter's Frank Scheck took a more enthusiastic view, memorably characterizing the film as an amplified, high-energy variation on the classic body swap comedy Big, and offering particular praise for both the film's overall tone and the performances delivered by its cast. Alonso Duralde, reviewing the film for The Wrap, situated Shazam within the broader visual evolution of the DC extended universe as a whole, framing it as a further step away from the more muted, austere color palette that had characterized earlier Zack Snyder directed entries in the franchise, following in the footsteps of Wonder Woman and Aquaman in embracing a brighter aesthetic. Duralde praised the resulting sense of visual and tonal lightness that Shazam brought to the DC film slate. Not every notable review was entirely positive. Writing for the AV Club, critic Ignatiy Vishnevetsky awarded the film a grade of B minus, offering a more mixed assessment that acknowledged the seemingly straightforward premise of an overpowered hero facing off against a comparatively one dimensional villain, while also arguing that the film nonetheless carried the trappings of a modern tentpole blockbuster, burdened by additional backstory for both its hero and its villain, along with underlying thematic material that the film introduces without ever fully articulating or exploring to its fullest potential. That same publication subsequently followed up with a separate piece, taking a broader, more analytical look at how the film engages with questions of masculinity within the superhero genre more generally. Focusing specifically on Billy Batson's arc as a transition from an adolescent boy figure into a man newly burdened with significant power and responsibility, treating the film as a meaningful text for examining how the modern superhero genre negotiates ideas about growing up and assuming adult responsibility. Benjamin Lee, reviewing the film for The Guardian, landed on a middling to positive assessment, awarding the film 3 out of 5 stars. Lee's review singled out the film's climactic act as a particular point of weakness, describing the finale as admirably self contained and comparatively small in scale relative to many other superhero blockbuster climaxes, but nonetheless criticizing it for dragging on considerably longer than necessary, offering what he described as a somewhat boring escalation of repeated anticlimaxes that, taken cumulatively, dull some of the emotional impact the filmmakers had clearly been building toward across the earlier portions of the story. Despite these specific criticisms, Lee's overall assessment still characterized the film as an imperfect but meaningful step forward for the broader DC film franchise, suggesting that even critics with substantive reservations about specific elements of the film still tended to view it favorably within the broader context of the DC Extended Universe's uneven critical track record up to that point. Taken together, the range of critical response to Shazam suggests a film that succeeded in winning over a clear majority of both professional critics and general audiences, largely on the strength of its tonal freshness, its comedic sensibility, and the chemistry among its central cast, even as some reviewers found elements of its plotting, villain characterization, or climactic pacing to be less fully realized than the film's stronger comedic and character driven sequences. This generally favorable reception, combined with the film's solid financial performance discussed above, position Shazam as one of the more well regarded entries within the broader DC Extended Universe franchise at the time of its release, a reputation that would go on to shape expectations for the character's subsequent on screen appearances, including both the eventual sequel and the related spin off feature that followed it in subsequent years. A recurring theme across much of the critical commentary surrounding Shazam involved comparisons, whether explicit or implicit, to the film's place within the broader arc of the DC Extended Universe's critical and public reputation up to that point. Several reviewers, including Alonso Duralde of The Wrap and Benjamin Lee of The Guardian, situated their assessments of Shazam within a narrative of gradual course correction for the franchise, framing the film as a continuation of a trend toward lighter, more varied tonal approaches that had begun with the well received Wonder Woman and continued with Aquaman's more colorful, adventure driven sensibility. This critical framing suggested that much of the positive response to Shazam was informed not only by an assessment of the film purely on its own individual merits, but also by its function within the larger trajectory of a franchise that had, in its earliest installments, drawn substantial criticism for a perceived tonal bleakness and narrative incoherence. Viewed against that backdrop, Shazam, embrace of comedy, warmth, and a relatively self contained, character focused story, appears to have registered with many critics as a particularly welcome and refreshing change of pace, even among reviewers who identified specific structural or pacing weaknesses within the film itself. The film's performances also drew consistent praise across the range of reviews, with particular attention paid to the central dynamic between Zachary Levi's performance as the adult superhero and Asher Angel's portrayal of the teenage Billy Batson, alongside the comedic chemistry between Levi and Jack Dylan Grazer as Freddie Freeman. Many critics singled out this central relationship, along with the broader ensemble of young actors portraying Billy's foster siblings, as the emotional backbone that allowed the film's larger, more conventional superhero plot mechanics to land with genuine feeling rather than functioning merely as spectacle for its own sake. Mark Strong's performance as the villainous Dr. Sivana likewise received a measure of praise for grounding a character whose motivations, rooted in childhood trauma and paternal rejection, gave the film's antagonist a more sympathetic and textured dimension than is sometimes found in comparable studio blockbuster villains. Even as some reviewers, including Vishnevetsky of the AV Club, argued that this backstory ultimately remained somewhat underdeveloped relative to the ambition of its underlying ideas. Taken together, the critical conversation surrounding Shazam, upon its release, reflected a film broadly successful in achieving its stated creative goals, delivering a lighter, funnier, more emotionally grounded superhero origin story that distinguished itself clearly from both its immediate franchise predecessors and from the broader glut of costumed hero blockbusters that had come to dominate major studio release calendars throughout the preceding decade.